Hello, everyone. This is Krishanu, and a very warm welcome to Weekends with Amit. Would have seen that our subjects of discussion varies from sometimes seemingly light to seemingly quite heavy. So today we are going to talk about something for which a lot of people are interested. They want to know what that is, how do we get there, is it worth the effort, stuff like that. And we are talking about enlightenment. Now, people who are spiritual seekers across the world, all on every time space that we look at, they are looking for this elusive holy grail, enlightenment. So, what is it exactly? What is it from the worldview of quantum science of consciousness? We are going to discuss this with Professor Amit Goswami and Dr. Valentina Onisor. A very warm welcome to both of you.
Thank
The
you.
subject for the day is what is enlightenment? And I was just saying a while back that this is something which is a holy grail sort of with so many people. People try to attain it, they look for paths, but first we need to know what is it actually, is it worth it? And then maybe we can, if possible, look at a little bit of how. So then over to you, Professor Goswami.
Thank you, Krishanu. Hello, everyone. You know, back in the 1970s, I was just beginning to entertain the idea that quantum physics might lead me to a science of consciousness. So, in that vein, I was called a mystical physicist, and I had the opportunity of talking to many people about their spiritual interests. I was very surprised when a psychiatrist whom I was interviewing for a show um, said to me that when I asked him what is the purpose of objective of your life, goal of your life right now, and he said, I want to be enlightened. I want to be liberated from birth, death, rebirth cycle. I just want to get it all done. It's boring. That surprised me. I didn't expect a very worldly, who I thought very worldly psychiatrist who deals with mental health problems, very worldly problems of sick people, um, to aim for enlightenment, which requires, obviously, if you look at history of such people, some sort of dedication to a spiritual journey. They should be meditators, at least. They should talk about spirituality, God, go to temples, churches, synagogues, what have you, uh, pray, all that stuff that you associate with uh, spiritual work. And this doctor who has no time for anything other than his patients, they have a high lifestyle and they make a lot of money and he wants enlightenment. And then gradually I realized that many people have this idea because there is a myth about enlightenment that has been created probably 1960s America as an import from Japan, part of Zen Buddhism, Rinzai Zen. They talk about sudden enlightenment, and the idea, when Americanized, translated to the removal of all suffering. You don't suffer anymore, you just live in perpetual joy, you are transformed, your behavior is perfect, that kind of image. And of course, usual New Age stuff that is based on the idea that all you have to do is to ask for it. Ask for it and think about it, and you'll get it. And this is why the question of, or the answer that I want to be enlightened, I was hearing again and again and again from my audiences. Then I started, even in my quantum activism workshops, which are fairly recent, like in the past 10 years, I would start every workshop with asking, how many of you want to be enlightened? And believe it or not, some 50% of the hands would go up. But then I would prod, come on, rest of you don't want, and then reluctantly everybody would raise their hands. Everybody wants enlightenment. But everybody really doesn't want enlightenment. What they want is end of all suffering. What they want is the capacity of being right all the time. They don't want to go through the agony of being wrong. The second mythology is enlightenment is a state enables to reach a condition in which you know everything. You know appropriate action. You're perfectly intelligent. Second myth. I have bad news for you. After I have investigated subject of enlightenment myself, having looked at consciousness from both of the usual side of life, normal side of life, practical side of life, earning money and career, etc., and also from the spiritual side of life, where you devote a substantial part of your time truly exploring the archetype of truth, archetype of love, archetype of wholeness. Those are the three archetypes I have explored in this life. And what I have learned, sadly, disappointingly for you, is that those things are just mythologies. No, one does not get all knowledge about everything by reaching the state that is normally associated with enlightenment, a state where one experiences oneness of one's self with all the objects that we experience. Normally, when I experience you separate from me. But in that state, which I myself experienced, I do not feel that separateness anymore. I cannot think of that separateness anymore. The thought that came, the first thought that came after that glimpse at oneness was that I am one with you, I am one with everything. And then that was followed by intense love for every possible person that I could meet in the 2 days that feeling lasted. Eventually, the feeling just gradually dissipated. That is my story. Now, of course, you can question whether that was genuine enlightenment or not. One thing I did notice, that there was no transformation. There was a strong memory of it. I still remember vividly what happened. And now that I have indeed gone through a little bit of manifestation of that insight, I have changed. Even then, I cannot say that I am totally transformed. So that mythology is not confirmed by my experience. And the second thing, I had a second experience where, again, it was exploration of truth this time. And that's when I discovered the metaphysics of quantum physics. Consciousness is the ground of all being. And again, it was enlightenment in the form of there was joy, there was truth. But guess what? Knowing that truth did not immediately entitle me to know everything. But it did entitle me to a substantial amount of knowledge through the establishment of quantum metaphysics. So this one, that knowing, having enlightenment, truth, is true to some extent. You know how to investigate truth. That would be a better statement. You can establish some truth, but you still have to make an effort. The ancient people did not have the mathematics of quantum physics available, yet they were able to establish much of truth about reality. In fact, in retrospect, I would say that they really were very, very, very smart people, contrary to what today's scientists try to prove, that they're just mystics. They had imagination, vivid imaginations. The word mystic originally came from words that mean that it is an initiation. But where do you hear that meaning anymore? Mystic now identified as mysterious, something maybe more imagination than truth. It's downgraded a lot. How did that happen? Because we have this failure to convince people of enlightened people that they are enlightened. What happened repeatedly in recent times, people would declare themselves to be enlightened, and then they would get caught up in scandals, sexual scandals, money scandals, the usual temptations of life. Money and sex get them. So where is transformation? This is the point that you have to understand, and therefore, let's now get into real discussion. The Enlightenment is not what you think. Those are mythologies. What is true, however, and my experiences, I had three of them, two I already mentioned, third one is an experience of unconditional love. But all three, I had to go through a manifestation stage before I could say that some transformation happened. I cannot even say that I have completed the manifestation stage. But transformation happened. That I can say. So, how much effort did it take to get to these experiences? This again I can say. Lots and lots. Not true that you can just intend for enlightenment like this psychiatrist did, and you would be enlightened. It doesn't happen that way. There is no free lunch anywhere. Isn't that sad? But the truth is that if a lunch is offered free, you won't even eat it. Isn't that the truth? We distrust free lunches. So why do you want it that way? Instead, accept it. Spiritual exploration is hard, but it's also fun. It's also one of the greatest things that you could do with your life. You know how you begin spiritual exploration? This will inspire you a little bit. You are listening to me only if you are not an information addict. What does that mean? You give up on information because you discovered that meaning and purpose of life is more fun. They satisfy you. Exploration of meaning got you here. And exploration of purpose got you here even more. Purpose of life is to explore these archetypes. I have already mentioned love and truth and wholeness, but there are others. Every person actually explores the archetype of abundance. Making money is the lowest form of that investigation. Everybody wants power, being powerful, dominate others, being famous. These are things that everybody wants, right? And some people get it too, and then they abuse it. So immediate sense. Do you know what an enlightened, powerful person would be like? An enlightened, powerful person would have the experience of expansion of consciousness enough to know that the greatest joy of power is sharing it. Yes, sharing it with people. You know, the problem of today's elected representatives, they all want power for themselves. After you elect them, they forget you. They just want how to make money for themselves, power for themselves, fame for themselves, name for themselves, all that. They don't care about what you think except when the election time comes. And then they will say all kinds of things, promise you, etc., etc. But if they investigate and explore power with love, that's the enlightened exploration of power. Similarly, enlightened exploration of abundance, being rich, if it's accompanied with, I want to be rich to help people, to get rid of this rich poor division, share my wealth with others, then it's enlightened exploration of abundance. Do those explorations lead to the enlightened experience? You bet it does. You bet it does. See, I was exploring love. The experience that came was every bit of what Maslow calls peak experience, what the ancient Indian researchers call samadhi, enlightenment, is a good translation. And yet, I was not exploring to be liberated from suffering. I was exploring love. My question simply was, how do I love my wife from my heart? So you can explore simply, how do I find wealth that I can share with others? How do I find power that I can share with others? And when you get power that is shareable, that expansion of consciousness that you can share, you are enlightened, provided, of course, you then manifest that capacity in your character. You change. When you change, we say that this person is moral authority. Gandhi did that. Nelson Mandela did that. Martin Luther King did that. There are today, if we look carefully, there are leaders who seem to have done that. And there are also others who were so narcissistic, so hung up on their power, that the last thing they would do is to help you. So there is a meaning for enlightenment. It's not just the way you think it is. Is there a meaning to the traditional way of thinking of enlightenment? There is, but that's very far away. That is not for ordinary people neither to understand nor to get into. Quantum physics has given us the science for understanding it. If you want to read that, Valentina will speak very soon about that book that we wrote together, Quantum Spirituality. You will have a fair amount of idea how to get enlightened in a real sense, but still be practical. Can be done. But I wouldn't even go that far, although I wrote that book because there are many people who are looking for enlightenment today quite seriously, and they need to be helped. So we certainly encourage those people for reading that book and entering the journey. We teach even a few such people. We have a master's and PhD programs. And believe it or not, there is one PhD student who actually is going for enlightenment in this style. I'm very proud of her. But others, they're not just ready. Until you are ready, one should not go for this thing. How do you know that you are ready? You don't know. I didn't know. It just happened that in the right time, the teaching came to me. Yes, that's another adage. When the time comes, the guru comes to you. But that guru is not a person or anything. That guru is just an event. A crystallization event happens when the goal of your life becomes clear to you. If that happens to you, then all power to you. You will find your path towards enlightenment. Whatever that means will also come to you gradually. It's actually not necessary to know a lot about enlightenment. But in case you have curiosity, as I said, Valentina will explicate what we wrote in that book, Quantum Spirituality. Valentina?
Hello, everybody. yeah, it may be even shocking for some people who are looking into quantum science and quantum physics for just the message of trying to understand the world, but not understanding that it is about our spiritual transformation eventually and authenticity, actually. And indeed, in the book, that was our first book, Quantum Spirituality. And the idea of quantum spirituality is to shift the traditional practice of too much or only emphasis on the self as an archetype. And in that way, going out of the world completely, many times not with, obviously, not with the right attitude, not at the appropriate moment, but many people just get out of the world because they are not able to cope with the world, or because their lover left them, or this kind of things. Yeah, so that's not the attitude to go out of the world and explore the self archetype in the order that is naturally. And also the traditions would talk only about destroying the ego, and eventually, of course, people are getting sick in this with this attitude also. So instead, in quantum spirituality, we describe the way how to focus on any archetype on which is part of your dharma, personal dharma, and embody that archetype. You can think of archetypes as divine attributes. So before getting into this ultimate state of being, that still, I would say that it has to be explored while you're still young as possible, but not only that. So not just leave the world and say, okay, that's it. Now I'm ready for the final enlightenment and so on. So again, it's a whole process of transformation that is required, a lot of mirroring and acknowledging all the blockages that we have in the path, and really engage into an intense state of creativity, take the quantum leaps that are needed, which will also refer to your state of health, but much more to the development of our own beings, which gradually will lead to a shift of character. So we emphasize more this archetype of wholeness, first of all, which is again just before getting into the self archetype. And that refers to the integration of all the dichotomies, universal and archetypal dichotomies. And again, in this way, it is encouraged the development of a healthy and authentic ego, not a strong egotistic ego, because the negative emotional brain circuits, as Amit mentioned, in so many people who had moments of enlightenment, and even I had 3 such moments, but again, it doesn't necessarily mean that you are transformed, So we forget so easily. There is so much inertia, which is obviously not by coincidence still in our way. So the process has to be there, and you have to be as authentic as possible. And of course, it will refer to the archetype of truth eventually, if you want to go to for the really the highest discoveries about why we are here. So all these negative emotional brain circuits, again, as I mentioned, they don't go away, but this kind of authentic ego will not use them for its own benefit, so it's not going to manipulate others, it's not going to display tantrums, using all these negative emotions for the ego's purpose, will not do that. And then we also say that transformation has to be done in stages. And again, we have to know when we study the brain structure and just read, for example, the quantum brain to understand more about this. There is really a reward system that we need to keep there, so the brain reacts either with rewards or punishment, and there is obviously a state of increasing happiness which will satisfy the reward brain circuits, and it's not a molecular happiness also, So the thing is that the world needs transformed people, and transformation, as you know, starts with ourselves. And then again, eventually, once all these dichotomies are integrated in our being, we get into what is called vairagya, dispassion. It's a little bit different than what we call detachment. So, and then you go towards the self archetype. Now, enlightenment, in other definitions, if you want, it's a beatific experience which is expanding spontaneously our consciousness beyond the limits, the usual human limits. And eventually it's that moment when you realize there's no limit to this infinite expansion, and even that the entire universe is alive. I had this experience, had it in South India, the strongest, and it stayed with me for 3 months. It was so amazing, and it comes together with a state of humbleness and the simplicity that is so fulfilling that no possible human relation can give this. But still, so this moment, obviously there is also a state of grace, which I'm thinking, if you want interpretation, obviously it's a divine grace implied, and readiness. But in the same time, as in the same way we speak about quantum healing, there is a process that we can learn how to go through. And again, to me, to be enlightened is to have a consciousness which is as refined, awakened, and even infinite flexible as possible. So it's really living this process of unlimited expansion. Now, I think we had some webinars about expansion of consciousness. Not that's the first place we have to go and understand what is that. But again, it doesn't mean to establish new limits, but actually, to me, it's about disappearance of all the limits. And then you also realize that you don't have to be something or not to be something, according to society and all that. There's a state of freedom there, together with all this simplicity and humbleness and this love pervading everything. And to me, again, the whole entire universe seems to be alive, starting from a simple grain of sand to all the processes that are in my body. So it's again, I'm thinking that we need to be able to conceive and contain that entire truth, and not just a quarter of a truth as we usually do. And that, again, to me, it makes me go back to the integration of all the dichotomies. But first of all, we have to realize all these dichotomies and see where we are, because again, we might not even have to do something, something specifically, because it is an inner state that probably you can say that even appears spontaneously when we are fully aware. You can think about that, because again, it's not about gaining, I don't know what, ideas or new experiences, because inside of us we have, in the potential way, all the experiences possible. And it's not about accumulating all kind of false qualities and go through necessarily a lot of sufferance. But even if sufferance, for me, it was a huge master in this life, and taking me to really ask fundamental questions with a lot of intensity all my life. So there are even practices which are meant for that moment. But in between, again, we need to be as real as possible that we can do. But again, eventually, if you want to learn about self-revelation meditations, they are totally different than the usual way of meditating. And eventually it refers to also stopping the usual identifications with all these things that we are not, all these projections of the ego at various koshas. And Ramana Maharishi style of meditation, if you want to go into that. But again, I would recommend it to be done later on. Until then, okay, we can train. But at a later moment when we are ready for that, it can appear in the middle of no matter what very simple activity that we are doing, really. Okay. Amit?
So I completely like this idea of starting right away. There is no better time to start than now. And yes, of course, you can pick up. And so far in the discussion, you have got an idea about how this goes and how all the things are, in a way, how things are, how the personal experiences were for both of them, for Dr. Goswami as well as Dr. Valentina. But what is there more to it? So the heart always wants more. So we go back to Professor Goswami again to understand, is there more to it?
Well, let me address the question somewhat differently. Let me dwell on the idea of starting immediately. Valentin already, I think, made it quite clear that journey towards wholeness begins with journey towards good health and well-being. psychological well-being, spiritual well-being. Today, we live in the age of information. Scientific materialism has convinced many, many, many people, perhaps as big as 50% of our whole population, that matter makes up everything. In that view, of course, enlightenment does not exist. Even consciousness does not exist. We are machines. So if you are a slave of that worldview, give up. This discussion will not make any sense to you. Health and well-being will not make any sense to you except feeding yourself bunch of drugs and supplements. Go that route. We don't mind. You are okay. Others who are not sold with this scientific materialist worldview, who still experience occasionally expansion of consciousness and identify it correctly as caring for others, not as a sense of wonder about black holes, that kind of stuff, but really just caring for others, expand to include others. You know, doctors are fairly non-committal to any metaphysics. They know healing is important, and they know that being truthful is important. So they frankly admit that yes, it is true that if you're looking for wholeness of your life, namely love in relationship, goodness in friendship, truthfulness, etc., live well, expansion of consciousness, then you will live longer and happily. People are writing, even materialist people are writing books about it. They don't go deep enough to change their worldview. That's sad. But at least, they're honest enough to admit that, look, it is true that if you explore wholeness, your health will improve, your longevity will improve. So what gives? Bhagavad Gita probably was written some 3,500 years, even longer ago. That's really very long time ago. And in that book, it was already formulated, called Karma Yoga. This is how you do it. What it means, basically, translated into quantum language, modern language, is integrating how you think, how you live, and how you earn your living. How you think requires the exploration of archetype of truth. Think about it. We want to think aligned with truth. We don't want to think conspiracy theories. We don't want to think imaginations. We don't want to think daydreaming. No, we want to think reality, right? Correctly. Correct worldview. Archetype of truth. The right thinking. Living involves relationship, intimacy, relationship with friends, getting along with colleagues, with bosses, with people who serve us, relationships. What archetype comes to your mind? Obviously, love for intimacy and goodness towards all people that you interact with. And then you have to make a living, professions. And one of the accomplishments that we have in our various enterprises is that figure out, Valentino, I just wrote a book, Return of the Archetypes, and we figured that the professions are all really corresponds to explorations of archetype. That was the intention originally. Of course, under our current belief system, they all have been degraded because materialism destroys all concepts that we had previously. So it will be hard to identify your profession with an archetype, but if you try, you can. Business people, for example, trying to be rich, that corresponds to the archetype of abundance. I have enough. Archetype of power, that one is pretty obvious, that has not changed much. Archetype of beauty, all artists, literators, musicians, they search for beauty. And then there is goodness and love. And then there is truth, justice, wholeness, and finally self. Self is for those people who renunciate all professions. So don't worry about that one. The other eight have professions. Wholeness connected with doctors, justice connected with law, truth connected with scientists, wholeness connected also with teachers, etc., etc. So professions brings you to a specific archetype. The specific archetype, Joseph Campbell taught us, brings us joy. In Indian research, it is revealed that this archetype comes from us from previous incarnations. It's called Dharma, personal archetype to explore in this life. So, the teaching of quantum spirituality simply can be stated as bringing congruence in how you think, namely your exploration of archetype of truth, how you live, namely your exploration of archetype of love and goodness, with how you engage with your profession, which already involves a little bit of power, a little bit of abundance, because those goals cannot be forsaken. Yes, making money by your profession is important because you have to support yourself. Having a certain amount of ability is important because you have to perform your job. But rest of it is your chosen archetype, dharma. So if you live your life this way, bringing all this together, that's wholeness. And that's how you begin your journey. If that intrigues you even more, I cordially invite you, we both do, invite you to our degree programs, certification programs, all about quantum science, spirituality of wholeness, how to live life. It's not all esoteric. We don't talk about enlightenment very much, but we talk about Urban Yoga quantum style. We talk about archetypes a lot. We talk about transformation. We talk about how to be happy, how to be intelligent. We talk about how to be healthy and how to be well. Okay? Thank you.
If we just listen to what Professor Goswami just said, we basically talk about most of the things that you care about. So don't delay. Visit our website www.amitgoswami.org or email us at info@amitgoswami.org if you have any questions. We'll be very happy to answer. See you there. Keep watching this channel, and thank you so much. See you next week.